I hope this works. Yes, it does. Yes, what we want to do in this good hour of panel discussion is to discuss the future of the European rural policy. But we will have to start from what is good in the rural policies and what might have to be improved. We also want to look at the possibilities of how the European Rural Parliament and the EU can work together. It is an important thing that we don't separate the policy makers and those who have to live or who can use these policies. So what we have done in the past days was to gather ideas for a better rural policy within the framework of European policies. One very important thing I would like to mention is when we talk of the EU, that is European institutions, and here on the panel we have representatives, not of all institutions, but we have people who shape policies, who have influence on policies, and we believe that the European Rural Parliament gives a lot of ideas of how they could be shaped. But when we talk of the EU as a European, or of Europe as the European Rural Parliament, it is not limited to the EU. This is an open movement, and it is important that we underline that we talk of Europe as a whole, including, for instance, the Western Balkan countries, our neighbors, and that in a moment when possibly Great Britain might be leaving the EU, we will continue working with our friends in the United Kingdom. This wide view is important when we talk about working together. It's not a question of just limiting our ideas to the EU. I wanted to say that at the beginning because it is a very important aspect of the work of the European Rural Parliament. Now, there will be two parts of this panel. The first one will be the invitation to the panelists to respond to three main questions, which I will repeat to you. You are prepared for it. And the second part is to include you, the audience, into this panel discussion, to raise questions, to give suggestions. It's important that we do this together. So, to the panelists, I would just repeat the three questions we would like you to respond to. And I mentioned the first part, that is, what is good about the current rural policies? What is worth to be preserved and to developed? The second one is, what are the key changes we can expect from the ongoing reforms of European policies, mainly the CAP, and within the CAP, what is going to happen to rural policies in the future if the proposals made by the Commission will be adopted by the Parliament and by the Council, hopefully in the near future. And then the third one, which is very important too, is what role do you, panelists, envision to play in order to make the rural policies better? It's always nice to say we demand or we propose or whatever, but it's very important to say what are we personally doing in our context, in our work, to make it possible that the changes that are needed are being made. So, Beata, I would like to ask you to start, because the Commission has made the proposals for a big reform, and the European Commission will be the one to implement what Council and Parliament will decide together. So what would be your answers to these three questions? You know, we are very limited in time. I know it's a big challenge to respond to these three questions, but give it a try, and I think everybody will be able to be short.
Thank you, Johannes. First of all, good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure also to speak the successes of your policy. So, and I will be speaking from the perspective of the rural development policy, which is a part of the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy. So for me, one of the successes is the fundamental logic of this policy, which attempts to improve the overall situation in the rural areas and address the main challenges, whether they are economic, environmental, or social. The current rural development policy offers a broad range of tools which help to address these structural problems affecting rural areas. Another positive aspect of this policy is that it has a large number of projects and small beneficiaries. And for me, this is also a good point. Unlike other policy areas, our beneficiaries are very often small communities, very often individual citizens such as small farmers. In this way, the policy can bring tangible results to citizens, and also what we call it allows to bring Europe closer to this individual citizen. And this is reflected in the achievements of the policy. A few months ago, we have received at the Commission annual implementation reports prepared by the Member States, and the figures speak for themselves. We have 500,000 beneficiaries which receive support for small investment in the current period. Over 300,000 farmers receive support to restructure, to modernize their holdings. Almost 200,000 young farmers receive startup aid to initiate their activities. At the same time, we also invest in larger infrastructure such as broadband, or promote knowledge exchange through various networks, and the results of this knowledge exchange and innovation projects are then disseminated through various networks. Another success of the policy is its environmental and climate dimension. Actually, rural development and common agriculture policy as a whole is a main funding tool in rural areas. It is the only policy, rural development policy, where there is a ring fencing in terms of budget, which means that 30%, at least 30% of budget which each member state receives, must be dedicated to action promoting environment and climate. And from this annual implementation report, we have learned with pleasure that actually a high number of member states exceed this 30% threshold by large. Another point would be, point of success would be approaches which actually stimulate this bottom-up approach. I don't have to explain to this audience what LEADER is, you know it very well. We are also a LEADER which started with the rural development policy, which was later expanded to other European investment and structural funds. We still are the only policy which also dedicates 5% of the overall member state budget to activities which are implemented by local communities, local action group, and so on. We have also started in this programming period another initiative called Smart Villages. It's probably a bit premature to call it a success in this stage because there is a lot of reflection going on, but potentially we see it as a success which will be and should be continued in the future. So what will change and what will not change in the future? The CAP and rural development policy as a whole will continue to address the structural problem affecting rural areas which have been identified in different documents and by different forums. However, there will be a change of focus, if I may say so. There will be a stronger focus on the environmental and climate actions, on innovation and knowledge, and also of a generational gap and stimulating growth and jobs. And all that will be, the objective of all this is to stimulate sustainable growth of rural areas, which will be delivered through 9 specific objectives and further reinforced by a cross-cutting objective of modernization, digitalization, and knowledge sharing, because it is considered that they can actually help to address many of the problems which exist in the rural areas. What will continue? We will continue, of course, these bottom-up approaches like LEADER and smart villages. Member states will be invited actually to come up with a strategy for smart village development. And this will not be only rural development policy. Other policy areas such as cohesion or social policy will also contribute to financing and supporting initiative. We will also, there will be specific action for generational renewal. In the first pillar of the CAP, there will be 2% ring fencing for direct payments, especially dedicated to young farmers. In the second pillar, we are increasing the amount of startup aid given to young farmers from 70,000 euro to 100,000 euro in the future. We will also be encouraging actions and supporting which offer broader benefits to society. So in this way, enhance economic potential of rural areas and farming and farmers. I think of actions supporting, for instance, local products, organic products, which bring benefits to society and to consumers, which ask for support of such issues. I know that you explain how the new policy will work, so I will not repeat what Mr. Dumitru said yesterday, but I would like just to emphasize the greater flexibility which will be given to member states to plan this support, to come up with intervention strategy. And by that I mean there will be relatively few rules at the EU level how the strategies should be defined. We will not be focusing that much on legality, meaning that support is given to projects as long as they comply with the rules. We will be reimbursing and supporting the effects, the outcome, the outputs which this project and policy will be bringing. Finally, the money. Okay, it's quite difficult to speak what kind of support will be given because the MFF negotiations are still ongoing, and we don't really know when the member states will agree what kind of money will be available for the rural development policy. I can say what the Commission has proposed last year. It's the overall rural development budget only. I'm not speaking about cohesion. It's 78.8 billion euro. Out of that, we still, Commission proposes that 30% at least is to be spent on climate and environmental objective, 5% for LEADER. It will be also possible to transfer 15% of direct payment allocation in each member state to rural development, additional 15% from the first pillar to the second pillar for climate and environment-related actions, additional 2% from the first pillar to the rural development policy for actions for the young farmers. And there is also 10 billion euro from Horizon 2020 program, which will be reserved for research in the area of agriculture and rural development. Have I exceeded my time?
You are close to it, but the last question is not yet answered.
Yes, so that's I'm almost there. Declaration and manifesto. These documents, they have their value because they steer, they contribute to conception, to ideas which we have about rural development policies. Some of the recommendations, first of all, they make diagnosis of the situation, which I think we all agree that diagnosis is correct. They propose, they call for actions, they make some recommendations, some of which are made to the national authorities, some to the European Union. Some of these recommendations, I can say that they are already in line with what Commission has proposed, notably in the area of environment, climate, generation, rural, and improving the overall quality of life of rural communities. You also probably know that the new Commission has great ambitions regarding development of rural areas. The new Commissioner designate announced a long-term vision for rural areas, which the Commission designate for agriculture will be entrusted with. However, not only, also cohesion policy will have to contribute. A Commissioner for demography. So that will be our challenges probably in the future. So declaration, manifesto will be important documents as well as stakeholders' involvement, because we cannot come up with any long-term vision without involving people, communities like yourself. Thank you.
So may I interpret your last response that you would make sure in your position that stakeholders like the European Rural Parliament has a voice in that process of defining?
My commitments, the first one is actually to see the proposal going through. We are at the moment in negotiation with the member states, with the parliament. They are not easy. There are a lot of concern. There is also a delay in adopting this proposal. So we are also in the process of adopting transitional regulation in between the current programming period and the future programming period. So that would be my commitment number one. Commitment number two, of course, stakeholders have to be involved, and stakeholders, there is already room for stakeholders' involvement in the current programming period. There are networks, there are ways of listening to stakeholders. Also in the Commission proposal for the future, there is obligation to consult stakeholders for the member states in the design of the CAP strategic plan, that actually member states have to report to us when they submit their proposals, how and whom they have involved, how and what has been or has not been taken into account. And the Commission, the member states in this respect will be accountable to the Commission, so they have to do that. I'm not saying this is all, because we are listening to you, we try to participate in the event, we give feedback when we go back to Brussels, what people want and how we can best address. So there is a lot of goodwill, I would say.
Good. And so then I interpret that the voice of the European Rural Parliament would be heard in the Commission, in the sense that when you discuss with member states, you would say, and what about the European Rural Parliaments and the European Rural Youth suggestions? Have you taken that into account? So
far we have not been that precise. We were talking about stakeholder involvement as a whole, but why not? Now we have these two documents. We can this give us more.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Beata. I would like to do the same procedure. Perhaps now, as the European Parliament will be asked to take that decision, as Beata said, not too late in time. So, Jonás Fernández Álvarez, you are a member of the European Parliament. You are in the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. So you deal with the money, and you deal partly with what is going to be reforms. You will not be voting in the Committee on Agriculture, but you will be voting in the plenary.
Yes.
So I would like to know from you, first of all, the response to the three questions, once again, and what specifically you see as the role of the European Parliament to listen to the voice of the rural people.
Okay. Now, first, good morning. Welcome to everyone to my constituency, and thank you very much to the organization for inviting me to participate in this panel. I would like to say first that I am a member of the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs, so I am not involved in the debate of the future of the CAP, and I am here because I was born in Asturias, and Asturias is in my constituency. So for me, it's really a great pleasure to have here to participate, no, and to have the capacity to listen to you and to improve my knowledge on this debate. No, in any case, I don't know if I go on in English or in Spanish, honestly, given that I am a politician, my constituents speak in Spanish, and but as you like, I don't know.
It wouldn't take more time, you
Okay.
see. If you stick to your time, that's...
No. The point is that it's true that I am not member of the Agri Committee, but in any case, of course, I was studying to prepare this panel this morning. And what my colleagues from the Agri Committee says is that first, the initial proposal of the Commission is not completely fine for us. And maybe the most important reason is that there is not enough money in the project, yeah? Because the Commission says that the current program has, I think, 5–6% less than in the previous program, but the legal service of the Parliament says that indeed the real reduction of budgets is bigger, maybe around 10% in the first pillar and 25–28% in the second pillar. So there are different views from the Commission and from the Parliament about what is the real budget of the new project. Apart from the debate of the budget in the committee and most for the members of my political group, I am a member of the Social and Democrats group in the Parliament. My colleagues in Agri consider that the current proposal at the end of the day implies a higher nationalization of the European policy. No, the structural or the strategic national programs at the end of the day can represent that national government will have more capacity to, it's true, to increase the flexibility of the program, but also to increase the differences, no, among member states. And given that we have a single market, if we let countries organize by themselves with more flexibility how they apply the cap, and given that we have a single market, at the end of the day we can create competition problems inside the European market. So in the current framework, as our colleagues from the Commission says, we are waiting for the agreement in the Council on the MMF, because without knowing what is the general budget for the next period, it's not easy to define the debate on the cap. But in any case, I think that maybe in the spring we will have a potential agreement in the Council. So in the Parliament we are thinking that we can or we must negotiate now the transitional regulation, because it's completely impossible to have in time for 2020, 21, 21 the new cap. But if in the spring we know the total budget for the next period, from the spring until the end of the year, we can move faster in the regulation that the Commission presented. But at least for my group, we want to keep at least the budget that we had in the previous period. We are not in favor to increase the flexibility, because at the end of the day, the flexibility can increase the arbitrage inside the single market, and I think that the second pillar is part of the future of the rural areas, and if it's true that the real reduction of the budget is 25–26%, is something that we have to avoid it.
Thank you. Perhaps I would still insist a little bit. I wouldn't insist so much because you are not a member of the Agriculture Committee. You're not in the details of the debate. But when it comes to your personal commitment, which is always a very important question, how far would you go in trying to influence what is the final vote of the European Plenary? with view to the integration of the different policies. You know, the agri always, you may say that's not true, but the DG Agri always has looked at agriculture and rural more from a sectoral view.
Yes.
And rural development was a new thing that came in rather late in the CAP, right?
Yeah.
Now we have a possibility in rural areas to tap into different funds of the structural funds. What would be your view of, it's not just about the money, it's how the money will be used.
Yeah.
And you said, yeah, possibly rural development will not have enough money. How would you try to influence in the Parliament that this integration and the possibility of use different funds for specific rural development, would you think that is a possibility? You would influence that from your group or from your position?
Okay, now I think that I am going to change to Spanish because this question is more speculative or more general.
No hay problema.
Bueno, esto es más ya una opinión personal sobre el futuro de las zonas rurales. En mi opinión, el siglo XX ha sido un siglo de concentración de la población en las zonas urbanas. El desarrollo postindustrial de todo el siglo XX es un desarrollo de concentración de la población en zonas industriales y zonas urbanas y vaciamiento de las zonas rurales. Pero realmente yo creo que estamos en los últimos coletazos de este paradigma y que realmente la digitalización de la sociedad y la digitalización de la economía van a acabar con las cadenas geográficas. Si realmente no, quizás, como digo, es difícil todavía de ver, pero en mi opinión las barreras geográficas que han ido condicionando la distribución de la población a lo largo de los siglos y muy especialmente en el último, en las zonas urbanas, yo creo que esto va a desaparecer o va a minorar la presión de la geografía. No, la capacidad de prestar servicios a través de medios digitales y, a su vez, los problemas de congestión de las grandes ciudades, realmente yo creo que abren un espacio de esperanza para el futuro de las zonas rurales, donde, en mi opinión, la demografía, la población se va a distribuir más de un modo reticular que en el actual modelo, ¿no? ¿Por qué digo esto? Digo esto porque probablemente la política agraria común ha sido y sigue siendo el principal instrumento de gestión del territorio y de las personas, obviamente, en las zonas rurales. Pero realmente, en mi opinión, esa relación directa entre el mundo rural y las actividades agrícolas, ganaderas, pesqueras, es una relación que se va a ir perdiendo, que se está perdiendo ya, y que la propia PAC, ¿no?, a través del segundo pilar, la división entre el primer pilar y segundo pilar, representa claramente ese desacoplamiento. Por lo tanto, cuando hablamos de la futura política agraria, o del conjunto del futuro de la política de desarrollo rural, ¿no?, pues ahí tenemos tanto la DG de Agri o el Comité de Agricultura, que obviamente tiene una perspectiva sectorial, pero también, y de manera creciente, en el Parlamento está el Comité de Medio Ambiente, que cada vez tiene una presencia más notable en los debates y que muchas veces generan debates donde las posiciones de Agri y las posiciones de Envi son distintas, porque tienen otras visiones.
O la regional.
O la regional, exacto. Entonces, yo creo que obviamente estamos en ese periodo de transición, teniendo en cuenta que siempre va a haber una especial atención al sector económico primario en el medio rural, porque al final es una manera de gestionar el territorio también, pero que realmente el desarrollo rural cada día se va a despegar de alguna manera, no solo de las políticas agrícolas, entre otras cosas porque, en mi opinión, la distribución de la sociedad o de la población en el territorio, ¿no? Vamos hacia un paradigma bien distinto al que hemos sufrido, porque lo hemos sufrido en el siglo XX, de concentración y de congestión.
Ya veo que su atención es para una más grande integración de los fondos para obtener algo que realmente toma en cuenta los cambios que se hacen entre las diferentes partes de la sociedad rural.
Sí.
Muchas gracias.
Nada, usted.
John, I would like to lead you again into the three main questions, which are very important. Starting, from what is good, then what is going to change, and then what would be your commitment. You are also into economic and social affairs, but on a different level. It's not the European Parliament, but you give advice to the other institutions. So what would be your ideas about these three main questions?
So good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. And for 1 second, I'll introduce myself. My name is John Bryan. I'm a pasture farmer from Southern Ireland. I live in a very rural area. The nearest house to me is a half a mile, 3/4 of a kilometre away. So when I go out and look at livestock in the night, I have to look at a light in the distance. Now, the climate is very like Asturias. It rains all the time. As I said to one of my colleagues, that rain is wetter in the winter. He said colder, but we're used to rain. But I've been a farm representative, a local representative for most of my life. So I was county chairman in Kilkenny, then I was national livestock chairman, then I became president of the IFA. And now at the moment I serve on the European Economic and Social Committee, which we call a representative of organised civil society, where different groups, whether they're environmentalists, farmers, consumers, have a say. And I think it's very useful that it's organised civil society, because I represent 80,000 farmers here. I see some of my colleagues from Rural Link, they represent people. Whereas sometimes when the Commission does these surveys, 1 or 2 people put in 200, 300,000 responses. So I think getting the views of civil society from people who are representative of their bodies is very important.
I couldn't have presented you this way, sorry,
Yeah.
but that's very good.
And the other thing I like to say is, along with being a farmer, I'm a pasture farmer. And when you introduced the people this morning, I felt we got left out. Lowland pasture farmers, we're not upland or hill, but we see that as very important in Ireland. 93 or 4% of the agricultural area in Ireland is pasture. And we see that as making a huge contribution through climate change. On my farm, I have over 10 kilometres of hedgerows full of biodiversity. I protect both sides of that with 2 strands of wire to make sure livestock don't damage it. And I have 2 kilometres of waterways, which I keep a barrier back to keep livestock back. So along with trying to earn my living as a farmer, I work very hard to contribute to protection of the environment. And also I get payments through rural development and structural schemes and environmental
So the policy is not so bad.
Yeah,
So
I have been a strong supporter of strong rural development policies for the last number of years. And I very much agree with the earlier speakers. It's important that we have ecosystem services and that you pay people to contribute. And my colleague there, everything he said in English, I agreed with him, and particularly on the budget. I got a little lost when you started speaking Spanish. In Ireland, depopulation is a huge problem, and it's not changing. We're losing the shops, we're losing the police stations, we're losing the post offices. So there's nothing to bring young people back. It's a huge pressure. So the pressure is all towards urban areas, and without huge investment, it's very difficult to see how that will be reversed. And I see agriculture, that's why I'm a very strong supporter of both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 payments. I think maintaining farmers, and I agree with a comment made yesterday morning by the representative, farmers can be the boots on the ground to protect the environment. Because if you lose the farmers, you're going to lose all that biodiversity. You're going to lose the protection of it. And I was speaking to a colleague of mine from Scotland here yesterday, and I was talking about having visited Scotland after the foot and mouth and saw uplands where gorse had taken over, where people used to go and walk with in the past. I, in my previous time, was chairman of a sheep reflection group, where in particular it was highlighted in Spain, where the sheep went off the mountains, that you lost the biodiversity and you got more forest fires and that. So I think the protection of an ecosystem, maintaining minimum stocking levels in those areas is very important. So the European Economic and Social Committee has taken very strong views on the future of the Common Agricultural Policy. We've produced reports and sent them to the European Commission, where we support the two-pillar model. Very much so. We see both pillars being important. So I'm getting on to my prepared speech at this stage. Maintaining the current two-pillar cap structure with strong direct payments in Pillar 1 to support farm incomes and rural development measures, in Pillar 2 to support vulnerable sectors and region and infrastructure and foster transition to more sustainable farms is essential. Maintaining an appropriate financial envelope for the cap is a precondition of sustainable economic, environmental and social of the EU farming. A strong cap budget is needed, and this is where I totally agree with my colleague. I think it's so important that we have that budget, and I agree with everything you said. If you have substantial cuts in Pillar 2, wealthy member states will top it up with strong cuts, and we won't have a common policy. So I absolutely agree with you that I think it's essential that we defend this budget because it's important. And the European Economic Committee has come out with strong recommendations for an MFF of 1.3% of GNI, which would be inappropriate, because the last thing we want is people fighting, should you have more in Pillar 2 or more in Pillar 1? We need an adequate budget. I speak at conferences, so people are saying we should take money out of the cap for IT, we should take money out of the cap for cultural heritage. The Common Agricultural Policy contributes to all these through smart farming and precision farming that contributes to IT, through protection of archaeological sites and heritage and culture contribute. So the idea of taking money out of it to move to other areas I don't think is good. I think it's important that the leaders in Europe make a decision. We already mentioned Brexit here. We have a member state leaving. Without a proper budget, you have populism rising in areas, and unfortunately in rural areas, because lower incomes and the pressure that's there. So I think the leaders in Europe have a duty to come together and come up with a strong MFF and come up with it fast, if at all possible.
John, you are already in question 2, right? The key changes, right? You are now in the key changes.
Yeah. Well, the key changes, certainly I support the new model where the 9 strategic objectives with targets and the move away from, we'll say, setting objectives and the idea of compliance. Now, measurable delivery is probably, it's easy to measure hedgerows, it's easy to measure water course, probably easy to measure water quality, probably greenhouse gas emissions, the sequestration in soil, a little more complicated to measure. And again, my colleague from Scotland, we were having that debate. I have a colleague from Austria who says there's excellent work there to show that well-managed pasture land in temperate climate has as much sequestration as well-managed forestry. So there's huge opportunities there. While I don't believe agriculture is the answer to all our problems, as the first speaker this morning said, I believe we can make a substantial contribution to it, and a contribution disproportionate to the number of people living in rural areas. But it is important. So I believe in the strategic plans. I also believe in subsidiarity, where the member states will decide what's important, because it makes no sense to have the same plan in Finland, the middle of Spain and Ireland. Desertification is a problem in Spain. So a strategic plan in Spain has to look at water management, maybe maintaining stock in uplands to stop these forest fires. And in Ireland, protection of biodiversity. Our greenhouse gas emissions are rising with nitrates and water. So we have to deal with those issues. Finland, it's a totally different climate. So I think the strategic plans offer an opportunity for member states to deliver more and hopefully with less bureaucracy. Because if there's one thing that annoys everyone, and again, I'm coming back to Brexit, one of the strong things that MEPs, Brexit and others use, all this bureaucracy from Europe, and they'd be the same people who'd criticise Europe for not auditing a euro spend. So you can't please some people. But the reality is, for the people on the ground, simplification is quite important, and some reduction in the bureaucratic nightmare that's there. Because the last opinion I worked on was generational renewal in agriculture, and travelling around every member state. I was in Poland lately, Belgium, where I'm most of the time in Brussels. Young farmers, it puts them off. The 2 things that put off young farmers at the moment is the level of bureaucracy, and unfortunately, that farming is no longer perceived as a nice way of life. That the media sometimes tends to say, blame farming for all the ills of the world. The reality is, and you yourself started there, Chairman, and some of the others, we should look at the positives. I try and get up in the morning and pick what is positive. What's positive that the Common Agricultural Policy? It has protected a lot of hedgerows. It has protected a lot of biodiversity. There's a lot of medium-sized farmers struggling there and living, but they'd be gone if they were in the US or they were in New Zealand, they'd be gone long ago, and that land would be abandoned. So look at the positives, and we have to work on the positives to grow them. So I think the best thing can be done in the reform of it is get those positives, and the environmental schemes, the rural development, as you say, has delivered in the past. In Ireland, we had what we call Rural Environmental Protection Scheme, which was a whole farm scheme. What it delivered on protecting the biodiversity, what it delivered on control of farm waste management, building more storage. And so you look at the positives in different member states. Finland is an excellent example, Austria. And unfortunately, some member states didn't have an adequate budget. Another area we're very strong on the Social and Economic Committee, the importance of the areas of natural constraint. We're saying that should be compulsory. We also supported the 2% for young farmers being compulsory. But we think there's areas like that should be mandatory, because some member states actually don't pay the 2%, don't pay the top up to young farmers. And then we also, which is not the most popular with all my farming colleagues, support capping, because we see it as a way of distributing money to more medium-sized farmers. And sometimes it is hard to defend some of the huge payments. And when I'm talking about huge payments, I'm not talking about 60 or 70,000 euros. So
John,
a greater balance.
John, in
yes.
spite of being ill, you have an energy. Yes. And the third question, what will you do, is answered, right?
No,
you will do
I will
everything.
do what I always do.
Yeah.
I every day defend the positives in farming. I was in Vilnius there a couple of weeks ago, and the German Minister for Agriculture there, where I did point out to her, I expected a wealthy country to put their hand in their pocket for Europe. I was at the Peace Bread Conference. The contribution that the Common Agricultural Policy has made to peace in Europe and unity, we should never underestimate, and I'm a proud European. So I take great pride in doing what I do and being a representative of the rural country. So I will continue to advocate and stand up for what I believe is the best.
Thank you very much, John. Gérard Choplin, you are here as Guillaume Cross was not able to speak to us, so thank you very much for jumping in. The Committee of the Region is another institution besides the Economic and Social Committee, giving advice and suggestions to the other European institutions, and you have been advising Mr. Cross in writing a report to comment on the proposal of the Commission concerning the CAP. Now, the three questions are also three questions to you.
Okay, thank you, Hannes. Good morning, everybody. Just I remind you what is the European Committee of the Regions. It's composed by people elected at the regional level. For example, there are representatives from the region Asturias, but also people elected on the municipality level, so both. So the bad news is that Guillaume Cross, who is Vice President of the region Occitanie in France, and is rapporteur for the next CAP at the Committee of the Regions, so at the end, could not come, so he asked me to replace him. And the good news is that our committee has adopted his recommendations last December, and I think some recommendations to the ministers and to the Parliament are quite strong. So I have not the time to go in the details, but to answer the first question, I would say that in general we welcome all the measures in rural development policy which facilitate the social and ecological transition, not just of agriculture, but also in general of the territory. And for example, inside the rural development policy, you have funds for to promote short supply chains, to support local and organic catering. It's not always used, but it exists. And naturally, the support of quality labels of mountain farming. Naturally, we support a lot the LEADER program. We have seen the last 2 days how they are really positive for rural development. Naturally, we support the support for young farmers. and also very important for less favored areas. It's the compensatory allowance for natural handicaps, and we don't understand why it's in the next CAP proposal, why it's not mandatory for the member states where this measures is relevant. So, and naturally, we are proposing in our recommendation a lot of things because we don't especially agree with the present proposal, and we would add positively. We would add some measures, like, for example, the promotion of training for new modes of production, especially agroforestry, agroecology. That should be really focused also as measure for young people becoming farmers. And but we disagree. The committee disagree, and there is a line for this in our opinion. We disagree with using public money of the second pillar of the rural development policy for so-called farmers' income insurance, because it could be very expensive, as we have seen in the United States, and it would never replace the regulation of the market we need in the first pillar, and it is a demand of the Committee of the Regions. And if farmers continue to sell their products very often or too often under their production costs and wait for subsidies to survive, we will never stop the depopulation, the rural depopulation. This is the motor we have to tackle first. And naturally, as also it was said, we opposed strongly, the committee opposed strongly, the reduction of 28% of the fund for the next, in the next budget time. We have seen yesterday or the day before that rural areas are 90% of the territory. Rural population is more than 50% of the population, but rural areas are receiving only 22% of all structural funds. Only 22% of structural funds. And worse, the committee is opposed also to the possibility of member states, and it's in the next proposal, and it is also in the present CAP, and it is the next proposal, that member state could transfer funds from the rural development, from the second pillar, to the first one. So it would be worse. And but we don't oppose. We agree with the transfer from first pillar to the second pillar, to strengthen the rural development. And also, Mr. Dumitru yesterday has told about rural agenda, but it does not exist. Rural agenda does not exist, was not adopted. There is a European agenda, that's good. But the European Committee of the Region asked for the adoption of a rural agenda. It means that all European policy should look for cohesion or rural territory in all European policy. And we asked really for an adoption of a rural agenda. And
Third question?
Yeah, the third question will be very concrete. What Guillaume Cross will do in the next weeks, in the next days, also with the result of this beautiful gathering. So we have next Tuesday, in 2 days, we have in the Committee of the Region a meeting with MEPs to discuss with them about the specific needs of rural areas. It's the issue of the conference. So we will come also with inspiration of Candás. And of 24 of November, it is in France, and Guillaume Cross is coming from France. You may know that in France there was a French rural parliament just now, it was just created. And there is a first meeting of Europe Committee of this new French rural parliament on the 24th November in the region Occitanie. So Guillaume Cross will bring also news from Asturias there. On December 4, the Agriculture Committee of the European Parliament will listen. There is an hearing on the CAP, on next CAP, and we'll listen to the opinion of the Committee of the Regions. So we will put there our strong demand. And also there will be on the December 10, the occasion, the DG Agri as the annual Outlook Conference. So we will probably intervene there. So it's very concrete, but and naturally we are following very precisely the process of negotiation between the Council and the Parliament, and we will do our best to influence the result of the negotiation in favor of rural areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. You see, I mean, I've been in the European Parliament for a long time, and these two committees haven't been looked at, you know, from the Parliament point of view as the key factors, but they are very active. They have a very concrete agenda. And it's important that the European Rural Parliament has contacts to these committees. They are there. We have started the first European Rural Parliament in the Economic and Social Committee. We were welcomed there. So the formal civil society and the Committee of the Regions are institutions that really are a good help into those institutions considering themselves as the key players, which is the Council, the Parliament and the Commission. The floor is open now for questions. I think you all have this declaration of the European Rural Youth, which I don't know how you worked it out, but it was on all the seats in the room, and we have very concrete proposals and demands here. They start very concretely with "we want," "we ask to," "we call for," and perhaps that is a good starting point for opening the debate to everybody of you. And I'm curious to hear your questions, your suggestions. We have, yes, please. Oh, we should, okay. Yes, I heard your time is limited.
Yes.
Would you like to give us, do you have to leave immediately?
5 minutes. 5
minutes?
Yes.
So, okay, is there a concrete question to, yes, please. Nicola. Short. Yeah, but who are you that everybody knows? Thank you. Well, that's a concrete question.
Yeah, no, a concrete question and concrete answer. No, the answer is yes. Yeah, and now the European Investment Bank is trying to review its strategy in the context of the global warming. Yeah. So as you know, now we are talking about the possibility to change even the name of the European Investment, trying to have a sustainable European Investment Bank, and there is a debate. We will have an exchange of view with the president of the EIB next month, and we are trying to think how we can introduce the ambiental or the ecological visions about what the institution does, and not only to provide advance or to focus on the industrial activities with less emission, but also to support industrial, agro-industrial activities in the rural area. But if you are a member, this month we will have a debate in the committee, and you can and you are invited to be there, yeah, and to ask to the President how we can adapt the current institution to the new objective.
Do we have a project between the two of you? We have
Yes.
2 members of European Parliament doing a checking of
Yes.
whether that can be useful. I
Sure.
think we have to do an agenda. And yesterday at the party, you met the European rural youth, and there's a project of receiving a delegation from the European rural youth in the European Parliament in January, right? So I think we can gather some very concrete points. So Ninas and Jonás Fernández Álvarez will check how the European Investment Bank can be used for improvement of the strategies
Yes.
for rural areas. Thank you very much,
sure. No, thank
Jonás,
you.
for
Thank you very
having
much.
been there. So, are there more questions or proposals from the floor? Yes, please. Short introduction who you are, and then your question or your recommendation.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Lorenzen. I'm working as a freelancer independent consultant for evaluation of the Common Agricultural Policy for different organizations. And I will also follow the same structure that you have on the positive and negative, and also some suggestions. For me, for all of us, rural policies under the Common Agricultural Policy. Yes, the CAP is really fundamental because the relevance of the budget is, remember that is the 40% of the budget of the European Union, and also for the mission is representing the territory, the rural territory that is more than 80% of Europe. Has a clear mission, is to maintain sustainable the sector, the food production, the management of natural resources, and the territory. And here is the rural strength socio-economical base in rural areas. Then there are 3 main objectives, and one of these is clearly rural. But rural policy needs to fight to have the right space within the Common Agricultural Policy. Until now, is one of the main objectives is maintaining the income of who. And yes, it's the main tool for manage the territory and impact the territory, but are we having the right impact to the territory, to the landscape? For me, it's not working well. We are not measuring the impact of the results of the direct payments. We have the evaluation at the member state level and regional level of rural development, the Pillar 2, but not the impact of direct payments that are maintained for decades. The capped payments, like both of them are supporting mainly intensive production, and we have capped payments like, for example, tobacco. Also, some agri-environmental measures are supporting modernization. It means investment has irrigation. And there is no coherence with other regulations like water demarcations, habitat directive, or phytosanitary directives. Then what to do? Demand. We need to demand public money to public goods, and to really demand how to use this 40% of our budget in Europe to support ecosystem services, as you mentioned, and has also Hugo before. At member state level, the CAP until now and the future strategic plans are decided mainly for the agricultural ministry, and other ministries like ecological transition in our case, or other ministries are just one partner more in the participatory approach of the governance, but it's decided just for one ministry. The member state needs to use for planning, for tackle other problems like the population. They need to use the opportunity to transfer the budget from Pillar 1 finally to the Pillar 2, and have this real strategic plan. And the Commission needs to into consideration the amendments for the ComEnvy and ComAgri, and listen to the Plenary of the Parliament, the Committee of the Regions, and also the reports from the Court of Auditors that are made regularly. And all of us in Europe, in the different countries, we are working as a coalition for other PAC. For example, in Spain we have Por Otra PAC, and it's like 37 organizations working in Spain, trying to influence the development of the new CAP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is a call for better integration, cohesion of the different policies. Are there more questions? Are there more? Yes, please. Yes, and then you. Yes, is that Hartmut? Yes.
Hi, my name is Kohar. I am from Armenia. Organization Women for Development. It's a local NGO, and we are very interested for investing rural experience of leader in our country, and we are very, very new in this sphere. And what you are thinking about non-EU countries for investing this approach in non-EU countries, because as an organization we are interested in to having some technical support, to having the local national manifesto, what you are doing about it for non-EU countries. Thank you.
Okay. You all keep those questions for you. And then the last word from Hartmut. Yes.
Thank you very much. Hartmut Bernd from the German Media Association and member of the ELAT Council. First of all, thank you for your contributions. But to be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed. I'm a little bit disappointed about the Commission's proposal for CAP, and I'm a little bit disappointed about what you were talking about, because you were talking about mainly agriculture, farmers, young farmers, digitization, innovation. But who is meeting here? It's the people of the rural areas. Not to be misunderstood, I think farmers are very important in rural areas, and farmers need support, no doubt. But we're also talking about that 50% of the people living in rural areas, and there are only few of them are farmers. And if we want to face the problem that people leave rural areas, these are mainly non-farmers. So I think we have to more look on all the other people. We have to look on the social society, the civil society, and not only on farmers. And this, I think, I'm missing in the proposal, and I'm missing this in the... And I think this is important also for the farmers, finally. It wouldn't be nice if they would be the only one to remain in our rural areas.
Thank you. I'm afraid I have to close this panel because time is moving on. We were a little bit late starting, so I would immediately give the word to Beata to react to what you've heard from the floor, and then the two of you.
I would start with the tricky issue of money. Of course, in DG Agri, I think we all would welcome and would love to have a higher budget for CAP as a whole and for rural development in particular. And we welcome actually the pledge of the new Commissioner designate for Agriculture and Rural Development, who announced publicly in the Parliament that he will fight for higher budgets. So we have not lost the hope that we may end up, and we hope that we will end up with higher budget because we are aware of the needs. About the issue of transfers, there are some people, they love transfer from the first pillar to the second pillar. There are those who see the things in another way. So the proposal actually caters both these views. However, if I look from a rural development perspective, there are more possibility in the new proposal to transfer money from the first pillar to the second pillar than in the current programming period. About the so-called renationalization of the CAP, with that I wouldn't agree at all, actually, because the new proposal sets EU-wide rules, basic rules, that's true, but they will be the same rules for everyone. In the current programming period, the Commission set up a high-level group of simplification. They were mainly national experts involved in the implementation of European investment in structural funds, thus also Rural Development Fund, parliamentarians and so on. That was the main recommendation, that we should give more flexibility to the member states to reduce bureaucracy, and also because this one-fit-all approach doesn't work. And it's also sometimes, so very often, it's very difficult to implement this one-fit-all approach. And what I would like to emphasize that rural development policy is a part of common agricultural policy. However, it is not limited to agriculture only. In the new proposal, there will be possibility to finance not agriculture-related businesses in the rural areas. The startup aid will also be available, these business development schemes. If member states decide to have them, they will be available also for, I don't know, hairdressers or whatever is needed in the rural areas. The overall objective is to improve the quality of rural areas, the quality of life for all people who live in rural areas, be they agriculture farmers or other people living in the rural areas. So I would also argue about this aspect of the policy, nowadays and in the future even more. And my last point would be that rural development policy is just one element of the policy. There are other funds which are active in rural areas now and which also be active in the future. So one of our objectives would be also to ensure synergies and complementarities between these funds. In the future, Rural Development Fund will not be a part of this common framework for the other share management funds. It is even one more reason to ensure that when preparing strategic plans by the member states, and for us, the Commission, when assessing them, to ensure that whatever funds we have, and there will be less money, let's face it, that they are used in the most optimal way.
Thank you very much. I hear this as a commitment in working in that direction. We are unfortunately very short of time. I have several signals that we should conclude, so I would ask the both of you to be very short so that we can conclude quickly.
Thank you very much.
Sorry?
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yes, please.
I'll be quite brief.
Sorry.
The first thing is the budget. If you haven't a budget, you can't operate a policy. And unfortunately, there's an expectation that the Common Agricultural Policy budget can cover far more. Some things that national government should be doing, some things that cohesion fund. And unfortunately, it's not 40%. The Oettinger proposal is for 28% of 1.1% to GNI. Angela Merkel and 5 other of the 6 wealthiest member states are suggesting 1% to GNI. So it would no longer be the cuts we were talking about earlier, it would be substantially more. So if we want, and DG Agri and DG Environment have actually come together to say they want the Common Agricultural Policy to do a lot more on climate change, to do a lot more on the Sustainable Development Goals, to do a lot more. So if you want people to do a lot more, I say it over, there's no such thing as a free meal. So I don't disagree with my colleague from Germany. We would like to, but if you're going to come into the country and plant maybe 10 kilometres of hedgerows and carry the up cost, the reality is there's a cost in doing these things. So if we want farmers to do them, and it's clearly the statistics are there to show the incomes on farms are 40% of the EU average. So lads, let's be realistic here. With 28% of 1% of GNI, we're not going to solve all the problems. So I think we have to work very hard. And the last thing I'll say, Chairman, is, and my colleague mentioned it today and yesterday, A transition is so important. In the last Common Agricultural Policy, we lost a lot of the good rural development plans, whether it was LEADER or whether it was REPS. But it's so important that we have a proper transition for 21 and 22 to protect all the good that the Common Agricultural Policy is doing. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And Gérard, I think the time is over. Would you agree just to say a word?
Yeah. So I wanted to answer the question of investment, because we have a proposal for investments from the Comité region, because very often, as you said, the investments in the rural development policy are not always sustainable, often greenwashing. For example, with big biogas installation, the committee recommend to limit at 10% of the rural development funds the investment. Okay, just to finish, I've looked at the youth declaration. I've looked at the project of declaration of Candás for this gathering, and my message shortly is: don't be shy. You have the majority of the population in Europe, or rural people, and you have 90% of the territory. So you can be much powerful if you all together you move, and not just against urban, but also with urban. And I would say climate change is radical. Biodiversity loss is radical. Farmer suicides are radical. So don't hesitate to battle for radical change. The radicality of today is the law of tomorrow. And as Bertolt Brecht said, is famous, but I'll repeat it: if you battle, you may lose. If you don't, you have already lost. So be active and don't be shy. I think the declaration's a bit too shy. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And apologies for being a bit late.
Sorry.